G'day everybody, how are we doing? Hope it's well. So, in this video we're going to be testing the diesel injectors for my RD28. Got one of them here. So, the RD28 are both of the older model from the GQ and the newer one, the ETI from the GU. They both use the Bosch VE style mechanical diesel pump. So this is not a common rail diesel system, this is the old style mechanical injection using lower pressure compared to common rail injectors. So these bad boys crack open just around 2000 psi. I think it's about 1500 kPa. So that is high pressure, so it is a bit scary compared to the common rail ones, which will have 30,000 psi injection pressure. That's absolutely nothing. But in saying that, before we do any testing, we got to talk about safety. It's the most important thing when doing any kind of jobs. You see I got my safety glasses already. Working with pressure is very scary, comes with a lot of risks, a lot of hazards, and has the potential for a lot of injuries to yourself. So when you test injectors, never ever ever put yourself in the line of fire. The line of fire out of an injector being the little needle, the nozzle on the front of this. So the injection pathway or the spray pattern is going to be out in sort of a conical shape out the front of this. So never, even when there's no pressure in the line, never put yourself, or try not to put yourself in front of the injector unless you know it is isolated from going off and lifting. As well as that, you know, just basics, safety glasses, make sure you're wearing the right clothing so that you don't get diesel pushed through your skin. Pretty much just be mindful, make sure you know what you're doing, and if you don't know what you're doing, either read up and make sure you do know what you're doing, or just don't do it at all and get someone, a professional, to do it. That being said, it's really interesting and it's going to be a fun video. So this is the injector, one of the injectors out of, I think it's number 6 out of my RD28 ETI. So the ETI injectors will have a slightly higher cracking pressure compared to the injectors out of the GQ. The reason for that being the ETI engine uses an 11mm plunger in the VE pump, whereas the GQ will have a 9mm plunger on it. Got the plunger here. Now, because of that, I decided to do the 11mm upgrade for my GQ pump, which I've got here. Just here. So I did all of the upgrades for it, did everything right, assumed I'd done it right, and put everything together, put the injectors in the car, got everything ready and went to start it. So that was a bit of an oof, you know, a bit of a hurt to my self-esteem, but didn't let that faze me. I ripped the pump out and gave it to our local fuel injection shop, and they tested it. They had to flush it out and put 1 or 2 new O-rings on the advance assembly and the advance plate, but they put it on their test bench, spun it up, and it passed test fine. So the pump must have not really been the problem. Now, looking back on that, I think there's a high chance that one of the lines wasn't tight enough, and as the engine started to run and a lot of pressure or a lot of volume of fuel started getting sucked through the lines would open up a little bit and air would get sucked in past some of the hose clamps which weren't tight enough. So that's what I think has happened, but in saying that, I'm also going to test my injectors just in case some of them have seized shut, because the engine would start for like a second or two and then it would die. So I'm just going to do this while I'm in here just to see if the injectors are still up to scratch, to make sure that they're alright. And yeah, so when we're testing the injectors, I'll talk about these. These are pintle style injectors. So the pintle style injectors will have a little needle in the front there that lifts and sprays forward. Now the pintle style, compared to the hole type injector, which has an array of holes around the front of the assembly here, that hole type has a big wide spray pattern, and they're meant for direct injection diesels. Now the RD28 has pintle style ones because it's a engine equipped with pre-combustion chambers. I think the reasoning for that is it doesn't develop quite enough compression and quite enough heat to ignite the diesel straight up, so it shoots into this pre-combustion chamber that saturates with heat during the engine cycling. And so yeah, that's pretty much it. So there are three things that you're looking for when you test diesel injectors. So the three things being the cracking pressure, the spray pattern, and the leak down. So cracking pressure, pretty simple. The pressure at which the needle lifts off and the seal is broken between the seat and the needle. You verify that to make sure it's not too low and not too high. The spray pattern, to make sure that the fuel is atomized properly so that the diesel will burn correctly and not knock a lot. And then leak down, so you bring it up to just before it cracks open and verify that the seat isn't leaking and dribbling, because that again would cause knocking and bad noises. So yep, I think we've covered safety, we've covered what's going on, and we've covered the diesel injectors that we're looking at. So I'll take you over to my rig now and speak to you a bit more, and then we'll throw these injectors on and start popping them open. Okay, so this is the rig that I've built up. What I've got here is an Enerpac hydraulic ram that runs through a 1/2 inch NPT pipe, which comes to a T and goes through a series of fittings up into my pressure gauge. So the cracking pressure for these injectors is about 2000 psi. So as you can see here, that's at about here on the gauge. For the best accuracy, what you want to do with a pressure gauge such as this, a mechanical one, is operate it between 30 and 60% of its swing. So the swing being from 0 all the way to 5000, that amount of area that the needle will cover. So pretty much for this gauge, the most accuracy you're going to see is between 1500 to about 3500, 3750. But yeah, that's just a rule of thumb, you know, it doesn't have to be perfect. So yep, after the gauge, it runs through a 1/2 inch to female JIC adapter, and then I've got a JIC to I think it's an autoclave fitting. I had to modify this one. The only thing I did have to do is that the thread for the autoclave only comes down to about here. That's because the autoclave, to make the seal, it's got this taper nose on the front which will seal into the seat that's ground into the bottom of the fitting. So what I had to do was run a tap down the end of this fitting to take up the room so that I can thread this BSP, or this, M14 thread down all the way so it'll bottom out. And I'm going to be running the crush washer that comes in the hydro head down the bottom, torquing it all up and hopefully getting it to seal up perfectly. So what I'm going to do is put my crush washer down in there and then make sure that it seats as centrally as possible. You can see that down there. And then I'm going to screw in my fitting and tighten it up. And that runs into my diesel fitting for the injector pump. So yeah, as you saw in that, that's just I think it's a M14 by 1.5 parallel thread with a crush washer on the back to the diesel injector thread. So that's got my old injector lines put on, and this injector line runs to this injector nozzle here. So I'm going to modify my broken spill rail so that I can clamp it onto this injector here and measure the leakage back through the diesel injector once I put a bit of pressure through it and pop it open. So all I'm going to do with the old spill rail is just make an incision here and then hold that like that, so the spill rail will just sort of sit off to the side like this. And now what I'm going to do is just loosely put the injector on just by finger. And I'm going to face the spill rail tube down as perfectly as I can and put this little catch pot I've made under it. And so now I'm going to pump my hand pump, I'm going to lock off the, and you'll see all the air is going to bleed out until it's just shooting out diesel. Doesn't have to be extremely tight, but just a little bit should be good. And now what I'll do, I hope you can all see this, I can't see my screen right now. Let's lock it off, pump some pressure into it. Pressure's starting to build now. So what I'm going to do is just lay these gloves over where the fitting manifolds are. You don't have to do this since they're all rated fittings, but I'm just going to do that anyway for my own safety. So now I'm going to be very careful, slowly wind pressure into this, and there we go. So it's popping at just under 2000 psi. So this is some slow motion footage of the needle lifting. We're starting with number 6 injector. Pay attention to the lifting and seating of the needle. So right off the bat, the seating of the needle is really loose. You can see it doesn't seat properly and it leaks through as the pressure drops back down. And the start isn't much better. You can see it sort of spits out and around. So this is a pretty bad spray pattern. I'd call this injector a failure. So on to number 5 now. You can see it lifts and seats really tightly. And there's no real dribbling, and the spray pattern's very good. So with the actual reading that it gives, it'll pop right at 1995, and it'll seat again right at about 1980. Injector number 4 was pretty bad. The slow motion just looked really cool. You can see it's really loose with its operation. So the lifting wasn't too bad, but the seating was awful. You see the spray pattern just goes right down to an actual jettison of diesel and no actual spray, mist. That right there was just trying to come up to pressure really slowly, and instead of lifting the needle and a big puff of mist diesel, it would just come out as a little jet, which is really bad, meaning that either the seat is worn down or the spring pressure is not enough in the injector. So again, I'm going to really lean on the handle of the pump right now and push a lot of pressure into it, and it'll lift properly and mist up and atomize a bit. And again, you see the seating of it is pretty bad. Number 2 was pretty good condition as well, as you'll be able to see. So the spray pattern's good in this one. It sprays in a bit of a conical shape, no excessive leaking. Maybe the seat is a bit leaky, you can see those bubbles dribbling off the tip there. But apart from that, I'd call number 2 injector a pass. The popping pressure again was 1995. Seating at about 1980, which is pretty good. Bit of slow motion so you can see that a bit better. You'll see the needle jump around as the pressure drops fast, but where it actually sits and stops once I've stopped putting pressure in is where its seating pressure is at about. And finally, injector number 1. This one as well was in pretty good condition, as you'll be able to see. A nice tight spray pattern, nice tight seating, and no excessive leak down. So yeah, number 1 was probably one of my best injectors, I'd say, probably the best. And then again, the blowdown pressure or the lifting pressure was 1995 psi. And yeah, about 1980, 1990 reseat pressure, sorry. So that's all the injectors there. Okay, so all of the injectors have been tested. You can see I've still got the end of my spill rail clamped onto the top of my number 1 injector. But I'll talk about the results here. The ones that I've marked with dots are the ones that didn't pass test. They failed pretty badly. So because I started with number 6 testing them, we'll start from number 1 just to switch things up, talking about them. So number 1 was almost perfect actually. There was no visible leakage when I was coming up to the pressure, the cracking pressure. It seemed to crack open and shut down fine with no excessive leakage and no simmering. Number 2 was a similar story. It passed fine. You could see it it lifted and seated pretty tightly, no leakage before and after pressure opening and closing it. It did have a little bit of leakage when you brought it just up to pressure. You could see a little bit of a drip form just on the needle under the pintle needle. So nothing too much. I probably would have run it again, to be honest, because I'm rough. But yeah, probably worth a fix. Number 3, I didn't even test because it would simmer and crack open under 1000 psi when the actual lift pressure should be 1995 or thereabouts. So I didn't even film that one in slow motion because it was so bad. Number 4, it cracked open at 1995 like the rest, so the lift pressure was right, but it would not reseat correctly. The pressure would go all the way down and the mist would turn into a steady stream coming out. Something's wrong there. The spring pressure might not be enough in it, or the seat might be worn down in the nozzle itself. So yeah, number 3 and 4 were failures, so they got the dots on them. Number 5 was actually alright. It passed, so yeah, lifted at the right pressure, tightly closed off alright, and there was a bit of visible leakage on that one as well. Again, a little drip forming on the end of the nozzle once it had been bumped up to pressure but hadn't cracked open. And then number 6, yeah, that was a fail, so that would actually not pop open till above 2100 psi, which is not good, meaning that the pump probably wouldn't have driven enough pressure into it to crack it open. That's probably not the reason the engine didn't start. That's probably another reason, but it's good I picked up on that. And yeah, the engine didn't seem to be doing any weird things while it was running, so these problems might have formed while the engine was just sitting out in my yard for ages with dust and dirt and rain blowing into it, you know. But yeah, that's pretty much it. So now I've found myself in a conundrum. So because, hang on. So I've got the old spill rail here. You can see that little nick right there is where I chopped it up to make my little leak down pipe for the test. But you'll see in the actual rail where the leak off tube is back to the tank, it's got a big tall ravine in here, and the seat, or the ring you'd call it, I guess, that seats on the top of the injector that is part of the spill rail. It sits up high on the spill rail that came off because this is the ETI model and it uses the number 1 injector with the needle lift sensor on it. And I went out and bought another spill rail because mine was busted and needed to replace it, but I accidentally bought a GQ spill rail. So this is one from a GQ which doesn't have the needle lift sensor on the number 1 injector because it uses the fully mechanical pump. So it doesn't need to know when the needle lifts for the ECU because it doesn't have one. So now I'm in a bit of a conundrum because I'm looking at these injectors right now. I'm debating whether I fix these ones now so I can make a video on it, or I get new injectors. So I called in a diesel injector shop here in Perth, and they said they'd suss me a new set of GQ injectors. It would be fine swapping out the number 1 since my wire hasn't broken. But the only thing is, if they're going to take these, if they're going to sell me some new injectors, they're going to have to take the old ones off my hands, and I don't really want to do that because I want to rebuild these for fun and for a learning experience. So yeah, I might actually do as my channel name suggests and go on eBay. I've found a set of GQ injectors. They seem to be about a bit cheaper than the ones that they quoted here in Perth for the set of them. So I'll weigh up whether I'm going to do that because, you know, I'd like to make the content and it would be a fun experience for me. So yeah, I'll get back to you all once I'm decided on it. I'll have to speak to the rents because the patrol now hasn't been running in over 6 months, which is, yeah, a bit depressing, but you know, got to move on. So yeah, that's pretty much it from me today. So I hope this video was interesting. Like and subscribe and comment on how you like my content, and if you want to see anything else. Got a bit more stuff coming out on the Hilux soon. I'm just keen to get the Patrol running so that I can go full send in the Hilux and wind all the boost into it. But yeah, apart from that, that pretty much covers everything. So hope everyone has a nice rest of the day, and I'll see you all later.